Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague for once again reinforcing why it's so important for us to get this compromise bill, this bipartisan bill on agriculture biotech to the President's desk so that we can move on to take on other matters. And that's one of the matters I want to talk about now. Again, I know that when you come on to C-SPAN and you come into this chamber, sometimes people who are watching or maybe in the gallery, it's hard to understand some of what we're talking about. So what I'm talking about is a bill that I hope that we vote on next week. It's a bill that in two separate measures went to the House with strong bipartisan support, or they were. Now it's coming back in what we call a conference report, and we're one vote away from potentially sending this bill to the President's desk. It has two parts. I'm going to speak predominantly on the second part. But the first part has to do with funding our veterans. I come from the state of North Carolina. We have a population of 10 million, 10% of our state. Nearly 1 million of our citizens are veterans. And we're very proud of our military tradition, and we're certainly proud of those who have decided to call North Carolina their home after their military service. As a matter of fact, I think everybody in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, have veterans as a priority. I firmly believe that. And that, I guess, is one of the reasons why I'm stunned that we've reached an impasse in moving forward and providing an appropriation that will let us increase funding to veterans. The bill that we seem not to be able to get consensus on, although we had consensus when we first sent it out of this chamber, provides critical funding for veterans' housing, for their disability compensation, for suicide hotlines, for treatment for PTSD, and for opioid addiction treatment. For all the promises that we are not keeping today, we can help fulfill those promises by providing the desperately needing funding that the VA needs. But instead of working on us to get this funding done, we're at an impasse now, and I simply don't understand it. To me, some of them may be genuine disagreements with the policy, but in some respects, it feels a little bit about like scoring political points, and I don't get it. But what I really want to talk about tonight is the other provision of the bill, and that has to do with something that's desperately needed in our nation, and it's funding and taking seriously the threat of the Zika virus. Zika is here, and we're in mosquito season. I went hiking this weekend, and I know mosquitoes are out in North Carolina. In fact, they are all over the nation. We need to work quickly to get a vaccine. We need it desperately. We're told by the CDC we could be 18 months away from having a vaccine for Zika. What we need to do is make sure we're funding research efforts so that we can win the fight against Zika. But I'll tell you, we can't do this without providing financial support. Now, as I said before, the Senate passed the bill earlier this year, and we sent it to the House. Now it's back over in the Senate, and it's one vote away from going to the President's desk. The bill spends over $1 billion to fight Zika in all of its forms. And my Democratic friends voted for this bill earlier in the spring at the same funding level we've talked about. There's discussion about spending more, but it seems illogical that we'd spend nothing at all. That seems to be the position that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are taking right now. We stand ready as Republicans and in the majority to provide this funding, but it appears as though because we've reached this political impasse that we could put American health and safety at risk. Now, again, we have a roll call vote from earlier this year where most of us, virtually all of us, voted for $1.1 billion in funding. That funding, I'll talk about in a little later, what it was directed towards. But we've got members who voted with us on that bill that are not willing to vote now to send this to the President's desk. I'm going to submit for the record, Mr. President, the list of people who voted for this bill the last time it was on the floor, now voting against it. I'm not going to spend time today with limited time to go through each of the members, but it doesn't make sense to me when you have cases reported, 5 cases in Colorado, yet we have someone opposing the bill. 24 cases in Pennsylvania, yet now before they've supported it, now they're opposing it. 27 cases in Virginia, 26 cases in Maryland, 52 cases in California, 198 cases in New York, for a total of 671 cases that have been reported to date in the United States. Most of these are travel related. But we have the threat of sexual transmission, and now that we're in the height of mosquito season, we have the real threat of mosquitoes infecting American citizens, and the threat is real. So, Mr. President, without going through all the lists, Florida's another example, 162 cases reported already. It would seem to me that the senators from Florida would want to get this funding to the president's desk so that we can start solving the problem. Now, Mr. President, again, members who now oppose this funding voted for it just a couple of months ago. And again, if you add up the number, that's 671 cases solely in the states where members now are opposing the bill. And the cases are growing. We now seem to be engaged in this sort of political divide that really is the Senate at its worst, and we're better than that. Now, I know there are a lot of reasons that have been put forth to oppose it in this version where they weren't against it before. There are some that said that it's because we're not funding or we're preventing funding for certain organizations. It's not true. The funding can flow through Medicaid to any organization that would provide health services that would be relevant to the disease. We also hear that some of the way that you control the population of mosquitoes that could potentially carry the disease is to kill them where they breed. And right now, we think temporarily for this mosquito season, we should do whatever we can to make sure that we kill the potential source of the disease that's transmitted through these mosquitoes. And it can be done. In fact, it can be done with chemicals that the World Health Organization says is safe in so many other jurisdictions. All we're saying is during this mosquito season, before we get a vaccine, that we use this chemical, this compound that can kill Zika mosquitoes and prevent them from transmitting the disease. That doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing to do. For 180 days, allow us to try and dramatically reduce the threat to the population. These are just common sense policies. The fact that we're having this discussion, the fact that we can't get it, the fact that time is running out and we have to get it done next week is ridiculous. We're well into the mosquito season. There's probably not anybody listening to this or in this chamber right now that had not been bitten by a mosquito already this year. Let's do what we have to do to keep America safe. Let's stop the partisan politics. Let's get this bill to the president's desk. And then let's move on to the many other things the American people expect us to tackle while we remain in session. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.